My mom called my novel a waste and threatened to kick me out, so I sold it for $50,000 and gave her a surprise gift that left her regretful for life. I used to think my mother would be the first person to celebrate my dreams coming true, until the day she read the opening lines I'd written and called them childish nonsense that would lead nowhere. That moment shattered something inside me that I'm still trying to piece back together. I used to think my mother would be the first person to celebrate my dreams coming true, until the day she read the opening lines I'd written and called them childish nonsense that would lead nowhere. That moment shattered something inside me that I'm still trying to piece back together. My name is Eliza Morgan, and at 24 years old, I had become a master of deception. Not the kind that involves elaborate lies or criminal schemes, but the quiet, soul-crushing deception of hiding who you really are from the person who's supposed to know you best. Every single day for 2 years, I lived split between two completely different versions of myself, and the exhaustion of maintaining that facade was slowly eating me alive. By day, I was the dutiful daughter my mother Margaret expected me to be. I'd wake up at 7, put on my sensible cardigan and comfortable flats, and drive to the Riverside Public Library where I worked as an assistant. My job was exactly as mundane as it sounds: shelving returned books, helping elderly patrons navigate the computer catalog, organizing children's reading programs, and processing late fees with apologetic smiles. It was steady work, the kind my mother approved of because it was reliable and respectable, even if the pay was barely above minimum wage. I'd spend 8 hours surrounded by thousands of stories, breathing in the familiar smell of old paper and binding glue, watching people discover new worlds between pages while I felt trapped in my own predictable routine. My coworkers were nice enough, mostly middle-aged women who treated me with the kind of maternal fondness reserved for someone they saw as still figuring things out. They'd ask about my weekend plans, my dating life, my career aspirations, and I'd give them the same vague answers I'd perfected over months of practice. "Oh, just taking things one day at a time," I'd say with a smile that felt increasingly hollow, still exploring my options. But the truth was, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life. I just couldn't tell anyone about it because every night after I'd come home and eaten dinner with my mother, after we'd watched the evening news and she'd gone to bed with her cup of chamomile tea and her accounting journals, I would transform into someone completely different. I'd close my bedroom door, pull out my laptop, and become the person I was meant to be, a writer. For 24 months, I had been working on what I knew in my heart was the best thing I'd ever created. The story had started as a vivid dream during my senior year of college, but over time it had evolved into something much more complex and meaningful. My protagonist was a 20-something woman named Iris, who inherits her grandmother's antique shop and discovers she has the ability to see the memories embedded in old objects. Every piece of jewelry, every photograph, every piece of furniture holds the emotional imprints of its previous owners, and Iris finds herself drawn into decades-old mysteries and family secrets. What began as a simple supernatural premise had grown into an exploration of how trauma gets passed down through generations, how families keep secrets to protect each other, and how sometimes the truth hidden in the past is the key to healing the present. The fantasy elements were there: Iris's psychometric abilities, the mystical properties of certain objects, the way memories could bleed through time. But at its core, it was a story about real human emotions and relationships. I had poured everything into those 400 pages. Every late night when I should have been sleeping, every weekend when I could have been socializing, every free moment I could steal had gone into crafting sentences that felt exactly right. I researched antique appraisal techniques, studied the history of various time periods, and spent hours developing a magic system that felt both fantastical and grounded in emotional truth. The characters had become so real to me that I would catch myself thinking about them during my day job. While I was shelving books about local history, I'd wonder what Iris would think about the artifacts described in their pages. When I helped patrons find romance novels, I'd compare their stories to the complicated relationship between Iris and the mysterious antique dealer, who becomes both her mentor and her love interest. But I couldn't share any of this excitement with the person whose opinion had always mattered most to me. My mother Margaret was a woman who had built her entire worldview around practical considerations and measurable outcomes. At 52, she had worked her way up from entry-level bookkeeper to head accountant at Hartwell Insurance, one of the largest companies in our city. She wore the same style of conservative business suits every day, kept her graying hair in a neat bob, and approached every aspect of life with the same methodical precision she brought to balancing ledgers. Her disapproval of anything she deemed impractical wasn't malicious. It came from a place of genuine concern for my future security. She had grown up in a working-class family where money was always tight, where dreams were luxuries that responsible people couldn't afford. Her own father had spent years trying to make it as a musician, playing in dive bars and chasing record deals that never materialized, while her mother worked double shifts as a waitress to keep the family afloat. I watched my mother sacrifice everything for a man who couldn't let go of a pipe dream. She had told me more than once, "I won't watch you make the same mistakes." From the time I was young, she had made her expectations crystal clear. Good grades led to practical college majors, which led to stable careers with benefits and retirement plans. When I showed interest in creative writing during high school, she enrolled me in additional math and science courses to keep my options open. When I announced my intention to major in English literature, she spent weeks trying to convince me to double major in business or at least minor in something useful. "Writing is a lovely hobby, Eliza," she would say in that patient tone she used when explaining why her way was best. "And I'm glad you enjoy it, but you have to understand, the world is full of talented writers who are waiting tables and living paycheck to paycheck because they can't make a living from their art. I want better for you than that." The worst part was that I understood her perspective. I knew she genuinely believed she was protecting me from disappointment and financial instability, but understanding her motivations didn't make her constant skepticism any easier to bear. Every time I tried to talk about a story I was excited about, she would listen politely and then change the subject to something more productive. Every time I mentioned a successful author or an interesting book, she would point out how rare literary success was, and how many people wasted years pursuing it unsuccessfully. So I had learned to keep my writing to myself. It became my secret world, the place where I could be completely honest about what I wanted and who I was. I wrote during the hours when she was asleep, saved my work in password-protected files, and never mentioned the characters and stories that occupied most of my mental energy. The isolation was overwhelming sometimes. I wanted desperately to share my excitement when I wrote a scene that gave me chills, or when I solved a plot problem that had been bothering me for weeks. I wanted to talk about my characters like they were real people, to discuss the themes I was exploring, to get feedback on whether certain scenes were working. But instead, I celebrated my small victories alone and worked through my challenges in solitude. Living at home at 24 meant I was constantly reminded of the gap between who I was pretending to be and who I actually was. The financial arrangement was undeniably beneficial. My mother covered all the major expenses, which allowed me to work part-time and have enough free time to write. But it also meant I was under constant surveillance, constant judgment about how I was spending my time and what I was doing with my life. Our dinner conversations had become increasingly tense over the past year. My mother would ask pointed questions about my career development and my 5-year plan, and I would give evasive answers that satisfied neither of us. She would make comments about former classmates of mine who had gotten real jobs with real potential, and I would nod and pretend to be inspired by their examples. "Sarah Henderson from your graduating class just got promoted to marketing manager at her firm," she announced one evening over meatloaf and mashed potatoes. "She's only 24, and she's already making more money than most people twice her age." That's what happens when you focus on building a real career instead of just drifting through life. The implication was always clear, even when she didn't say it directly. I was wasting my potential, squandering my opportunities, and taking advantage of her generosity while refusing to take my future seriously. She would remind me frequently about how lucky I was to have her support, how most young people my age were struggling with student loans and rent payments and multiple jobs just to survive. "You have a tremendous advantage, Eliza," she would say, gesturing around our comfortable middle-class home. "You have the freedom to be selective about your career choices because you don't have the financial pressure most young adults face. But that freedom comes with responsibility. You can't just drift indefinitely." What she didn't understand was that I wasn't drifting at all. I was working harder than I had ever worked on anything in my life. I was developing skills, creating something meaningful, and pursuing a goal with more dedication and passion than I had ever felt for anything else. But because she couldn't see the value in what I was doing, it looked like laziness and lack of direction. The guilt was constant and exhausting. Part of me felt genuinely grateful for her support and genuinely worried that I was taking advantage of her generosity. Another part of me felt angry and resentful that I had to hide such an important part of myself from someone who was supposed to love and support me unconditionally. And underneath both of those emotions was a growing fear that maybe she was right. Maybe I was deluding myself about my abilities. Maybe I was wasting time on something that would never amount to anything. But I couldn't stop writing. Even when the doubt was overwhelming, even when the secrecy felt unbearable, I couldn't give up on the story that had become the most important thing in my life. Every night when I opened my laptop and returned to Iris's world, everything else fell away. The financial stress, the family tension, the uncertainty about my future, none of it mattered when I was writing. That was the life I had been living for 2 years. Days filled with mundane responsibilities and careful performances. Nights filled with passionate creativity and authentic self-expression. It was exhausting and exhilarating and completely unsustainable, though I didn't realize how unsustainable until the morning when my carefully constructed double life came crashing down around me. Because secrets, especially the ones that matter most to us, have a way of revealing themselves at exactly the moment when we're least prepared to deal with the consequences. And I was about to learn that the person I had been trying so hard to protect from my dreams was actually the person I most needed to protect my dreams from. It happened on a Saturday morning in March. I had gone to the library for a weekend shift, leaving my laptop closed on my desk as always. When I returned home that afternoon, I found my mother sitting on my bed with my printed manuscript in her hands. She'd found the hidden folder, somehow guessed my password, and printed out the entire novel. The look on her face was a mixture of disappointment and anger that made my stomach drop to the floor. "What is this, Eliza?" she asked, holding up the stack of pages like evidence of a crime. It's a novel I've been working on," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "A novel." She said the word like it tasted bitter. "You've been wasting your time on this fantasy nonsense while I've been supporting you, believing you were focused on finding a real career? It's not nonsense, Mom. I've worked really hard on it and I think it's actually good." "Good?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Eliza, this is exactly the kind of childish dreaming that's going to leave you broke and disappointed. Do you have any idea how competitive the publishing industry is? Do you know how many people waste years of their lives chasing this impossible dream?" I felt tears starting to form, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "You haven't even read it. How can you say it's not good if you haven't read it? I don't need to read fairy tales to know they won't pay your rent or build your retirement fund." She stood up, still clutching my manuscript. "This ends now, Eliza. You're going to delete this file, throw away these pages, and start focusing on your actual future. You can't make me do that." Her eyes narrowed in a way that I recognized from childhood, the look that meant the conversation was over and compliance was expected. "Can't I? Let me remind you who pays for the roof over your head, the food in your stomach, and the car you drive. Let me remind you who's been supporting your figuring things out phase for the past 2 years while you've apparently been playing pretend." The threat was implicit but crystal clear. "Stop writing or lose everything. Mom, please, just give me a chance to—" "No." Her voice was final. "I will not enable this delusion any longer. You have 1 week to delete this file and start applying for real jobs with career potential. If you don't, you'll need to find somewhere else to live and some other way to support yourself." She dropped the manuscript on my desk and walked out of my room, leaving me staring at the scattered pages of work that represented 2 years of my life. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about all the hours I'd spent crafting each scene, developing each character, polishing each sentence until it felt perfect. How could something that brought me so much joy and fulfillment be worthless? How could my own mother be so quick to dismiss something I cared about so deeply? But I also couldn't ignore the practical reality of my situation. I made $12 an hour at the library. That was enough for personal expenses while living at home, but nowhere near enough to cover rent, utilities, food, and all the other costs of independent living. My mother knew this, and she was counting on it. The next few days were suffocating. Every interaction with my mother felt loaded with unspoken ultimatums. She'd ask pointed questions about my job search progress, and make comments about young people who refuse to grow up and face reality. The manuscript sat on my desk like a monument to my failure to be the daughter she wanted, but something inside me refused to give up. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the first time in my life I'd created something I was genuinely proud of. Whatever it was, I couldn't bring myself to delete those files. Instead, I made a decision that would change everything. On Thursday evening, while my mother was at her weekly book club meeting, I researched literary agents and publishing houses. I spent hours crafting query letters, writing a synopsis, and preparing submission packages. I may have been naive about the publishing industry, but I wasn't going to let my novel die without at least trying to give it a chance. By the end of the night, I had submitted my manuscript to 15 different agents and publishers, including some of the most prestigious names in the industry. I used my personal email address, not the one my mother had access to, and I made sure to save all the confirmation receipts in a hidden folder. If my novel was truly as worthless as my mother claimed, then rejection letters would prove her right. But if there was even a chance that I'd created something valuable, something worth reading, then I owed it to myself to find out. The following months were the most difficult of my life. On the surface, I appeared to comply with my mother's demands. I deleted the visible copies of my manuscript, applied for several full-time office jobs, and stopped talking about writing entirely. But underneath this facade of obedience, I was constantly checking my email for responses from agents and publishers. The rejections started coming within a few weeks. Form letters, mostly polite but impersonal. Thank you for your submission, but this project isn't the right fit for our list. Each one stung, but I tried to remember that rejection was part of the process for every writer. My mother seemed satisfied with my apparent surrender. She praised me for coming to my senses and choosing maturity over fantasy. She helped me prepare for job interviews and talked about how proud she was that I was finally taking responsibility for my future. These conversations made me feel sick to my stomach. I was lying to her every day, living a double life that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. But I also felt angry that she'd forced me into this position, that she'd made it impossible for me to be honest about something I cared about. By summer, I'd received rejection letters from all but 3 of the agents and publishers I'd contacted. My hopes were fading, and I started to wonder if my mother had been right all along. Maybe I was delusional. Maybe my novel wasn't as good as I thought it was. Then, on a Tuesday morning in August, I received an email that changed my life forever. The sender was submissions@penguinrandomhouse.com, and the subject line read, R.E. Manuscript Submission, The Memory Keeper. My hands were shaking as I opened the email. It was from an editor named David Chen, and instead of the form rejection I was expecting, it was a detailed, enthusiastic response about my novel. Dear Ms. Morgan, it began, I want to thank you for submitting The Memory Keeper for our consideration. I rarely find myself this excited about an unsolicited manuscript, but your novel has genuinely captivated me from the first page. I had to read the sentence 3 times before I believed it was real. The email went on to praise the originality of my concept, the depth of my character development, and the quality of my prose. But the most incredible part came at the end. I would very much like to discuss publishing your novel with Penguin Random House. We're prepared to offer you a contract with an advance of $50,000, with the possibility of additional marketing support if the book performs well. Please call me at your earliest convenience to discuss the details. I screamed, right there in the library break room where I was reading emails during my lunch break. My coworker Janet rushed over to ask if I was okay, and I had to pretend I'd just seen a funny video online. For the rest of my shift, I was completely useless. I kept rereading the email, making sure I hadn't misunderstood anything. Penguin Random House wanted to publish my novel. One of the biggest publishing companies in the world thought my work was worth $50,000. But as the initial euphoria faded, I realized I had a problem. How was I going to explain this to my mother? How was I going to tell her that the childish nonsense she'd forced me to abandon was actually good enough to be published by a major company? I decided to call David Chen first, and make sure the offer was real before having any conversations with my family. When I spoke to him the next day, he confirmed everything in the email and explained that they wanted to fast-track the publication process, with a tentative release date in the following spring. Your novel fills a gap in our fantasy catalog, he explained. It has commercial appeal but also literary merit. We think it could do very well with both casual readers and critics. After hanging up with David, I sat in my car in the library parking lot for 20 minutes, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't just validation that my writing was good. It was enough money to be completely financially independent. I could move out of my mother's house, rent my own apartment, and pursue writing full-time if I wanted to. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely free. That evening, I decided not to tell my mother about the book deal right away. I wanted to savor the secret for a little while, to enjoy knowing that everything she'd said about my unrealistic dreams had been completely wrong. But secrets, especially life-changing ones, have a way of revealing themselves. It happened the following Saturday. My mother had been in my room, supposedly putting away clean laundry, when my phone rang. I was in the shower, so she answered it, thinking it might be important. It was David Chen, calling to discuss some contract details. When I emerged from the bathroom, my mother was sitting on my bed with my phone in her hands, and an expression I'd never seen before. A mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been shame. "Eliza," she said slowly, "who is David Chen, and why is he calling you about a book contract?" My stomach dropped, but I also felt a strange sense of relief. The secret was out. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. "He's an editor at Penguin Random House," I said, wrapping my towel tighter around myself. "They want to publish my novel." "Your novel? The one you deleted?" "I never deleted it, Mom. I submitted it to publishers after you told me to throw it away." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind working through the implications. "He mentioned something about an advance. What did he mean?" "They're offering me $50,000 to publish the book." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. For months she'd been telling me that my writing was worthless, that pursuing publication was a waste of time, that I needed to focus on real opportunities. Now she was confronted with undeniable proof that she'd been completely wrong. $50,000, she repeated quietly. "Yes. And that's just the advance. If the book sells well, I could make more." She set my phone down on the nightstand and looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Eliza, I don't understand. How did this happen? When did you submit the manuscript?" "The week after you told me to delete it. I sent it to 15 different agents and publishers. And you didn't tell me? You made it very clear that you didn't want to hear about my writing. You called it childish nonsense and threatened to kick me out if I didn't give it up." She winced at my words, but I wasn't finished. "For months, you've been talking about how proud you are that I came to my senses and stopped pursuing this fantasy. You've been congratulating yourself for forcing me to be realistic. But the whole time, one of the biggest publishing companies in the world was reading my book and deciding it was worth publishing." "Eliza, do you want to know the worst part?" I was getting emotional now, all the anger and hurt from the past few months bubbling to the surface. I couldn't even be excited about it. I couldn't celebrate the biggest achievement of my life because I knew you'd find a way to diminish it, or turn it into something negative. "That's not fair," she said, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "Isn't it? When I told you about getting the dean's list in college, you asked why I wasn't focusing on more practical courses. When I got promoted at the library, you said it was just postponing the inevitable need to find a real career. Nothing I've ever accomplished has been good enough for you unless it fits your definition of success." She was quiet for a moment, staring down at her hands. When she looked up again, there were tears in her eyes. "I was trying to protect you," she said softly. "I've seen so many people waste years chasing dreams that never pan out. I didn't want you to go through that disappointment. But you never gave me the chance to succeed either. You decided my dreams were impossible before I even had the opportunity to pursue them." "I was wrong," she admitted, and the words seemed to cost her something. "I was wrong about your book, and I was wrong about your talent." It was the first time in my adult life that I'd heard my mother admit she was wrong about anything. Under different circumstances, it might have meant everything to me, but too much damage had been done for a simple apology to fix things. "I'm moving out," I said. "Eliza, please, let's talk about this. I've already started looking at apartments. The advance money is enough for a security deposit and several months of rent. I can support myself now. You don't have to move out. We can work through this. I can learn to be more supportive." "Mom, you spent months convincing me that my dreams were worthless and that I was naive for pursuing them. You threatened to kick me out if I didn't give up writing. Now that you know I was right and you were wrong, you want to act like we can just move past it?" She was crying openly now, which was something I'd rarely seen. "I'm sorry, Eliza. I'm so sorry. I was scared, and I handled it badly, and I hurt you." But please don't leave. You're my daughter, and I love you. If you loved me, you would have supported my dreams instead of trying to destroy them. I thought I was being practical. You thought you were being controlling. There's a difference. I went to my closet and started pulling out clothes, packing them into a suitcase I'd bought the week before. My mother watched in silence, occasionally sniffling or wiping her eyes. "What about us?" she asked finally. "What about our relationship?" I paused in my packing and looked at her. For a moment I saw not the stern, disapproving woman who dominated my adult life, but a frightened mother who was realizing she'd pushed her daughter away. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I need time to figure out who I am when I'm not constantly defending my choices to you. I need space to build the life I want without worrying about whether it meets your approval. And you can't do that while living here? Mom. 3 hours ago you still thought my novel was a waste of time. The only reason you're being supportive now is because a major publisher validated my work. What happens the next time I want to pursue something you don't understand or approve of?" She didn't have an answer for that, because we both knew what would happen. The same pattern would repeat itself. Judgment, criticism, threats, and emotional manipulation designed to keep me within the boundaries of her comfort zone. I finished packing my immediate necessities and loaded them into my car. My mother followed me outside, still crying, still trying to convince me to stay and work things out. "This is a mistake, Eliza. You're throwing away your family over pride." "I'm not throwing away my family, Mom. I'm choosing myself for the first time in my life. And you think that's going to make you happy? Living alone, with no one who cares about you? I think it's going to make me free. And right now that's more important to me than being comfortable." I drove to a small apartment I'd viewed the previous week, a one-bedroom place with good natural light and space for a writing desk. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. For the first time since college, I would be living in a space where I could be completely myself without judgment or criticism. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I signed the publishing contract, worked with David Chen on preliminary editing, and began the process of promoting the book before its release. I also resigned from the library and started writing full-time, something I'd never imagined would be possible at 24. My mother called frequently at first, trying to convince me to come home. She apologized repeatedly, promised to be more supportive, and even offered to help with my writing career. But her offers felt hollow, motivated more by guilt and fear of losing me than by genuine understanding of who I was and what I wanted. "I read your book," she told me during one of our phone conversations. "I got a copy of the manuscript from your room and read the whole thing. And it's actually very good, Eliza. I can see why they want to publish it. The characters feel real and the story is engaging. I was wrong to dismiss it without reading it. Thank you for saying that. Does this mean you'll consider moving back home? I promise things will be different. Mom. The problem isn't that you didn't like my book. The problem is that you tried to prevent me from pursuing something I cared about without even giving it a fair chance. The problem is that you threatened to cut off support if I didn't abandon my dreams. Reading the book now doesn't change any of that." She was quiet for a moment. "What do you need from me, Eliza? How can I fix this? I need you to understand that I'm an adult who's capable of making my own decisions, even if they're decisions you wouldn't make. I need you to support me even when you don't understand what I'm doing, and I need you to trust that I can handle failure and disappointment without needing to be protected from every risk." "I can do that," she said quickly. "I can learn to do that, maybe. But I need to see it, not just hear promises, and I need to do it from a distance, at least for now." When The Memory Keeper was published the following spring, it exceeded everyone's expectations. The reviews were overwhelmingly positive. It made several bestseller lists, and the film rights sold within 6 months. My publisher immediately wanted to discuss a 2-book deal for my next projects. My mother attended the book launch event, sitting in the back row with a proud but uncertain smile. She applauded enthusiastically when I read excerpts from the novel, and afterward she introduced herself to other attendees as Eliza's mother with a tone of genuine pride that I hadn't heard before. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see how talented you are," she said when she congratulated me after the reading. "I'm sorry it took a publishing contract for you to believe in me. We've slowly begun rebuilding our relationship, but it's different now. I'm no longer the daughter who seeks her approval for every decision, and she's no longer the mother who believes she knows what's best for me better than I do. It's more equal, more respectful, and honestly, more genuine than our relationship has ever been. I still live in my small apartment, though I could afford something bigger now. I like the independence, the quiet, and the reminder of what it felt like to choose my own path despite everyone telling me it was impossible. I have a writing desk by the window where I work on my next novel, and every morning when I sit down to write, I remember that I almost let someone else's fears convince me to give up on my dreams. The most important thing I learned from this experience isn't about writing or publishing or even family relationships. It's about the difference between supporting someone and controlling them, between protecting someone and limiting them. I learned that sometimes the people who love us most can also be the ones who hold us back the most, not out of malice, but out of their own fears and limitations. I also learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was, that I can survive without approval or financial support if necessary, and that my dreams are worth fighting for even when no one else believes in them. My mother and I have dinner once a month now, and she always asks about my writing with what seems like genuine interest. She's reading my second novel as I write it, offering encouragement and feedback instead of criticism and doubt. It's the relationship I always wanted with her, but it only became possible after I proved I didn't need her approval to succeed. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd given in to her demands. If I'd deleted my manuscript and focused on finding a practical career, I probably would have been fine, employed, stable, living a life that made sense to everyone around me. But I would have spent the rest of my life wondering what might have been, wondering if my dreams could have come true if I'd just been brave enough to pursue them. Now I know the answer to that question, and it's changed everything. I learned that sometimes the biggest risk isn't pursuing your dreams, it's not pursuing them. I learned that other people's definitions of success don't have to become your own, and that the approval you think you need might actually be the thing that's holding you back. Most importantly, I learned that the voice inside you that says this matters, this is worth trying, this could be something special, is often wiser than all the practical advice and reasonable concerns of the people around you. Sometimes you have to be willing to disappoint others in order to avoid disappointing yourself. I'm still writing, still building the career I dreamed of, still living the life I chose instead of the life others thought I should have, and every time I doubt myself or wonder if I'm making the right choices, I remember that night when I submitted my manuscript, despite my mother's threats, despite my fears, despite every rational reason to give up. That moment taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is trust yourself, even when no one else does. Especially when no one else does.